Hello, everyone. This is Coach Oliver once again for game number 2 of the FIDE Grand Prix 2022 in Berlin, Germany. And we have a draw, a calm before the storm. Okay, now we're going into the tie breaks tomorrow to determine the winner of the FIDE Grand Prix Leg 1 in Berlin. All right, let's go through the game. Aronian was white. I thought it was a fight. He started with e4, right? I was also expecting a fight in the Berlin. Yeah, e5, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. But instead of the Berlin, we have the Italian, the famous Italian pasta italiana. d3, knight to f6, castles d6. All right, c3, a6, a4. Bishop into a7. Okay, that was the main point of a6 to clear the way for the bishop going into a7. Knight into a3. Okay, knight goes to c2, potentially bishop e3, and then the knight can also capture to the exchange on e3. Knight e7, knight c2, knight g6, bishop e3. And here's what happened actually. Takes on e3. Okay. From the knight on b1, went to a3. Now it is centralized on e3, keeping an eye on d5 and f5. Yesterday it was also Aronian as black with his knight on e6. Well, imagine yesterday, his knight was on e6. And with the white side, it's the same knight on e3. Well, Aronian likes that e3 and e6 square for the knight. Castles a5. Okay, in this game, Nakamura went for c6. And here's a game to look at with the move knight g4. Right? In one of the games played before, it was Carlsen versus Anand. Anand went for knight g4. Let's try to look at this one. Since Aronian and Nakamura was a draw, let's try to look at the decisive game in this line, right? So knight g4, h3, Anand went for knight takes e3, f takes e3, pressure on f7 with the bishop and the rook. Queen into e7, threatening bishop e6. Carlsen went for queen b3, so that if Anand goes for bishop e6, he has this queen takes b7 later on. c6, Anand protects that pawn on b7 after c6, right? Okay, d4, bishop e6, takes. Wow, this is an interesting line of pawns. Yeah, they're queuing up from e3 to e6. Yeah, rook a d1, centralizing the rook. Rook a e8 to give freedom to the queen. The rook protects e6. Potentially, queen can go to c7. Queen to b4. Takes on d4, c takes d4. An interesting choice by Magnus. If he tries to get rid of the double pawn, he is probably worried about this knight f4 square, yeah. Okay, c takes d4, e5, takes on e5, takes on e5. All right. Earlier, there were two double pawns, but this time it's only white having the double pawns. But these double pawns, okay, this e3 pawn actually controls d4 and f4, so it's not that bad. And all right, let's go back. The jumping jack. That pawn on e4 as well is taking away f5 and d5. So queen takes e7, rook takes e7. Pawn structure, black is a bit better, but This pawn on a5 is nailing this 3 pawns. So that's a good pawn nail on a5. Yeah. Rook d6. Nice rook lift by Magnus. Knight into h8, repositioning the knight, going into f7. Knight d2. Knight f7, rook d3. All right. Knight g5, rook f5. Another rook lift. Yep. If rook takes the rook, pawn takes on f5, no more double pawn. h6 protecting the knight, h4. All right. Knight has to go back. Knight h7, knight b3. The point of a5, nailing the b7 pawn, fixing the weakness on b7. The knight can jump to c5. Yep. So knight into f6, knight c5. Not only is this knight attacking b7, but it's also protecting the important e4 pawn. Rook into f7, h5. Wow, 2 nails. 2 nails. Magnus is a carpenter. Yes, he has 2 nails. King h7, rook d8, rook controlling the 8th rank. Black's rooks are very passive. The knight is also passive, it is pinned. g6 takes on g6, king takes g6, rook d6, pin on the knight on f6. This is an isolated pawn on e5. King goes to g7, knight e6 check. Repositioning the knight with knight d8. Knight attacks the f7 rook and still keeping an eye on that b7 pawn. After rook f8, the g4. The timing of the move with the pin on the rook on f8, the knight on f6 cannot move as well with the pin with the rook here. c5. The king cannot go back to g7 because there's a double attack on e6. Rook and king, right? So c5, black is in Zugzwang. b3, what a beautiful final move by Magnus. And here Anand resigned because there's no other way than to say goodbye. Okay, let's just say the rook goes back to e8, the knight just takes on b7, takes on c5, yes. And if this rook goes to c7, let's say rook c7, the knight jumps back to e6, double attack on the rook. So not there, same as the g7 square. So now let's say rook h7, we still have knight e6. If the rook stays on f7, then rook takes e5. If the knight takes on g4, we have knight f4, king goes back to g7, rook g6, and takes the knight, white wins. So that was a pretty good win by Magnus against Anand in this line where Aronian and Nakamura played. All right, let's go back to the game. So an improvement here by Naka with c6, which was also played by some other players lately. Yeah, the latest games being played were c6. Yes. Bishop b3. Okay, moving the bishop back, threatening knight c4 to knight b6. h6, bishop into c2. Okay, now with the bishop on c2, it keeps an eye on e4, so we have a push on d4. Rook e8, rook e1, centralizing the other rook, queen c7, d4 finally. Takes on d4, queen takes d4 to protect e4. Okay, c5. Nakamura is going for bishop d7 and bishop c6, eyeing the e4 pawn. Here, Aronian went for queen d2 and then bishop g4. Now let's take a look at knight takes e4. Is this possible? Unfortunately, no, because now there's a discovered attack on the queen. And then this bishop and rook attacking e4. If you take on d2, there's rook takes e8 check first, yeah. If you go king h7 and then knight takes e7, white wins. So knight takes e4 is not possible. He went for bishop g4. In the previous game by Anand against Carlsen, knight g4 was played, but in this case with the pawn on c5, You cannot move the knight to g4 since the knight can jump to d5. Yeah, it's hitting the queen, hitting the b6 square. This is also a very bad pawn on d6, a backward pawn. So exchange, takes stakes, queen d1, b5. Okay, a very active attempt by Nakamura. A takes b6. Then we have the en passant on b6. Queen takes b6. This pawn is isolated. This pawn is backward, but queen is active on b2. White has to be careful of f2, right, with a knight on g4. Aronian with knight d2 is an invitation for the repetition of moves. Yep. With knight d2, all right, the queen is attacking g4. He allowed queen takes b2, actually. Here, Nakamura spent at least 10 minutes here before going queen takes b2. He might have been checking for maybe a queen trap, but there's none. Queen takes b2, knight c4. These are all fours. Takes on c3, hitting the knight. Okay, you cannot take g4 here, of course, because queen takes on c2. So knight c4, queen takes on c3, hitting the knight on c4, knight b6, rook a b8, keeping an eye on that knight. Knight d5, attacking the queen, double attack, but the queen stays on b2. If you take on g4, black also can take on c2. Rook to b1, queen a2, rook a1, the repetition. Queen b2, rook b1, queen a2, rook a1, and queen b2. We have a draw. And with that, the classical game in the finals is tied at 1 game apiece. There are only 2 games, okay, in the classical. So since they're tied, we are going for the tiebreak tomorrow with the rapid. If there's a tie again in the rapids, we go for the blitz, and if it's a tie in the blitz, we go for the Armageddon. All right, what's at stake here? Okay, the winner in this finals will get 13 Grand Prix points, and the losing finalist will get 10 points. So there's a difference of 3 points, and also the prize money. The winner of the Grand Prix in this leg 1 will win 24,000 US dollars. And then the loser gets 18,000 USD. So there's a difference of 6,000. Yeah. Is it dollar or euro? Maybe euro. Yes, 6,000 difference. That's a lot of money here. So that's what's at stake here. Although these players are not going for the money, they're going for the qualification. Yeah, 2 slots. And Nakamura and Aronian is actually are the favorites now. They are now the favorites to qualify for the last 2 spots in the candidates. Okay, the 6 players in the candidates, we have Nepomniachtchi being the former challenger. We have Rajabov. I think he is the wild card since he did not play the candidates in 2020 because of the pandemic. Because of the start of the pandemic, he was supposed to play that one because he was the winner of the World Cup. 1 and 2 in the Grand Swiss, we have Firuza and Caruana. And then first and second also in the World Cup, we have Duda and Karyakin. Yep, so 6 slots have been filled. We only need 2. And now Nakamura and Aronian, probably it's their candidates to lose this time. Yeah, the slots. Yeah. All right, so we are expecting an exciting tiebreak tomorrow. Who do you think will win the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin? We'll find out as we cover the tiebreaks tomorrow, same time, 6 p.m. UAE time, 10 p.m. Manila time. All right, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting our channel on Facebook and on YouTube, Charles Max Chess channel. And this is Coach Oliver. Stay safe, everyone. Bye.